Welcome back to another deep dive into the Fallout universe, where we explore the hidden corners and forgotten details of the post-apocalyptic wasteland. Tonight, we're examining the internal structure of the Brotherhood of Steel, their rank hierarchies from initiate to elder, the specialized Scribe Orders that preserve pre-war knowledge, the doctrinal differences between West and East Coast chapters, and the protocols that govern how this techno-religious military order actually functions day to day. So, settle in, let the wasteland's dark history wash over you, and let's explore the machinery that keeps the Brotherhood of Steel operational 2 centuries after the bombs fell. The Brotherhood of Steel exists as something between a military order and a technological cult, its structure forged in the fires of desertion and refined through centuries of post-apocalyptic survival. In the depths of Lost Hills Bunker, where Captain Roger Maxson first turned his back on the United States Army in October 2077, the foundation of this hierarchy began not with grand design, but with necessity. Soldiers who had discovered the horrors of Mariposa's FEV experiments needed a new chain of command, a new purpose in a world that had ended around them. The rank of Elder, that pinnacle of Brotherhood authority, wasn't originally meant to be hereditary or democratic, but rather emerged from those first desperate days when someone simply had to make the impossible decisions about rationing, security, and whether humanity deserved a second chance at the technologies that had annihilated civilization. The progression from initiate to elder represents more than military advancement. It's a philosophical journey through the Brotherhood's core beliefs about technology, humanity, and the weight of knowledge in irradiated hands. An initiate begins as essentially nothing, a child born into the Brotherhood or a rare outsider accepted through sponsorship, learning to recite the Codex before they can properly read, memorizing the serial numbers of pre-war weapons before they understand what those weapons can do to human flesh. These children spend years in the lower levels of whatever bunker or stronghold houses their chapter, their small hands polishing power armor they cannot yet wear, their voices echoing through concrete corridors as they repeat the catechism. Technology is power. Power must be controlled, and the Brotherhood alone has the wisdom and strength to wield it responsibly. The taste of recycled air becomes familiar, that metallic tang mixed with machine oil and the faint ozone smell of energy weapons on nearby charging racks. When an initiate reaches their teenage years and demonstrates sufficient understanding of both combat fundamentals and technical knowledge, they may petition to become an aspirant, though this petition must be sponsored by a senior member, usually a paladin or knight sergeant, who has observed the young person's dedication and aptitude. The aspirant phase represents a brutal testing ground where the Brotherhood's attrition rate becomes starkly visible. These young men and women undergo physical conditioning that would break civilian wastelanders, running in partial power armor frames until their legs shake and their lungs burn, learning to field strip a laser rifle blindfolded because, in the darkness of a raider ambush or the irradiated fog of the glowing sea, sight becomes unreliable. They study under scribes who seem to take particular pleasure in identifying weaknesses, who will fail an aspirant for incorrectly categorizing a piece of pre-war technology, not because the error matters practically, but because precision and protocol separate the Brotherhood from the scavengers and tribals who stumble through the wasteland with no understanding of the weapons they carry. The promotion from aspirant to knight marks the true beginning of a Brotherhood career, a ceremony that varies between chapters but always involves the Codex and power armor. In the West Coast chapters, descended directly from Lost Hills, the ritual includes a day-long fast followed by a combat trial where the aspirant must demonstrate proficiency with at least 3 weapon types and successfully maintain a suit of T-45 or T-51 power armor under battlefield conditions. The East Coast Brotherhood, particularly under Elder Arthur Maxson's leadership, simplified this ceremony somewhat. Practical necessities of warfare against super mutants and synths meant the Brotherhood needed knights faster than tradition preferred. Still, the moment when a senior paladin seals an aspirant into their first assigned power armor, when that fusion core slots home and the HUD flickers to life and suddenly the world seems both smaller and more manageable through that polarized visor, represents a psychological transformation as much as a rank advancement. That armor becomes identity, becomes purpose, becomes the physical manifestation of the Brotherhood's covenant to stand between humanity and the dangers that technology presents. Knights themselves divide into specializations that reflect the Brotherhood's dual nature as both military force and preservation society. Knight soldiers form the backbone of combat operations, the troops who patrol the wasteland in power armor, who clear buildings room by room with laser rifles and super sledges, who establish perimeters and hold positions against impossible odds because retreat means abandoning technology to the unworthy. Knight engineers handle field repairs and maintenance, their power armor often covered in tool attachments and armor plating scorched from welding work, their knowledge of fusion cores and servo motor calibration meaning the difference between a squad returning home or being torn apart by deathclaws because someone's armor locked up at the critical moment. Knight scribes represent the blurred line between military and research, trained in both combat and technical documentation, tasked with accompanying field teams to properly catalog and assess any recovered technology before it reaches the formal scribe orders back at base. The rank of Knight Sergeant emerges not from time served, but from demonstrated leadership capability, a knight who can keep a squad alive in the wasteland, who understands both tactical doctrine and the Brotherhood's strategic goals, who can make the hard choices about when to risk lives for technology, recovery, and when to withdraw and preserve manpower. These NCOs form the critical middle layer of Brotherhood military structure, translating Elder directives and Paladin strategies into executable orders for the Knights who actually walk through radioactive ruins and firefight with raiders high on jet and armed with weapons they don't understand. A Knight Sergeant in the East Coast Brotherhood might lead a squad of 6 Knights plus support personnel, rotating through various assignments from technology recovery in downtown Boston to perimeter security around the Prydwen to escort duty for scribe expeditions into particularly dangerous zones like the glowing sea or the deep subway tunnels where feral ghouls nest in the darkness. Above the sergeants, the Knight Captain rank appears primarily in larger chapter organizations, particularly the Mojave Brotherhood under Elder McNamara and the Capital Wasteland Brotherhood during Elder Lyons' tenure. These officers command multiple squads, coordinating operations across wide areas, managing logistics and supply chains that keep Knights equipped and armored while balancing the Brotherhood's perpetual resource scarcity against operational demands. A Knight Captain might oversee the entire Hidden Valley bunker's security rotation, or manage all ground forces operating out of the Prydwen's deployment bay, or coordinate the network of observation posts that the Brotherhood establishes around areas of strategic importance. The position requires political acumen as much as military skill. Knight captains must navigate the eternal tension between the knighthood's warrior culture and the Scribe Orders' research priorities, must justify equipment allocations to cost-conscious quartermasters, must mediate disputes between knights who believe the Brotherhood should be more aggressive in technology confiscation, and those who see every civilian death as proof that Elder Maxson or Elder Hardin has lost the original ideals that Captain Roger Maxson died defending. The rank of Knight Commander represents the absolute pinnacle of the Knight Order, typically held by only 1 or 2 individuals per chapter, those rare warriors who combine tactical brilliance with unwavering loyalty to Brotherhood doctrine and the charisma to inspire both Knights and Paladins to follow them into situations where survival seems mathematically improbable. The Knight Commander serves on the Elders' War Council, coordinates with Paladins on strategic planning, and maintains operational command over all Knight-rated personnel in the chapter. In the Capital Wasteland Brotherhood, This position held particular significance during the war against the Enclave, when the Knight Commander had to balance Elder Lyons' increasingly humanitarian policies against the traditional Brotherhood focus on technology recovery, walking a political tightrope while simultaneously prosecuting a military campaign against power-armored Enclave troops who possessed superior numbers and equivalent technology. Parallel to the Knight progression, the Paladin track represents both elite military status and philosophical commitment to the Brotherhood's highest martial ideals. Promotion from Knight to Paladin isn't automatic or based on time and grade. It requires sponsorship from an existing Paladin, demonstration of exceptional combat capability, mastery of advanced weapons and armor systems, and perhaps most critically, internalization of the Brotherhood's core mission to the point where a Paladin will prioritize technology security over personal survival without hesitation. The trial varies by chapter, but universally involves scenarios designed to test judgment under pressure, situations where the correct Brotherhood response conflicts with immediate tactical advantage or personal compassion. A knight seeking Paladin rank might be placed in command of a patrol that discovers wastelanders defending their settlement with stolen Brotherhood laser rifles. The test isn't whether they can defeat the settlers militarily, but whether they'll prioritize weapon recovery over minimizing civilian casualties. Whether they understand that from the Brotherhood's perspective, allowing advanced energy weapons to proliferate among the ignorant and desperate represents an existential threat to long-term wasteland stability that outweighs individual lives in the immediate term. Paladins operate with significantly more autonomy than knights, often leading independent missions deep into hostile territory, empowered to make command decisions without consulting the chain of command because communication infrastructure in the wasteland remains unreliable at best. A Paladin might spend months operating from a forward outpost with a small team, mapping pre-war facilities, cataloging technology caches, eliminating threats to Brotherhood interest, all while maintaining the equipment and morale necessary to survive in an environment where every day presents new permutations of violence and radiation and mechanical failure. The Paladin's power armor, typically T-51 or the superior T-60 variants in East Coast chapters, becomes a second skin through years of use, its servos responding to thought as much as physical motion, its systems tuned to that individual Paladin's combat style and physical specifications until the armor functions almost as an extension of their nervous system rather than external equipment. The rank of Paladin Commander appears in larger Brotherhood chapters to coordinate multiple Paladin teams and integrate their operations with the broader Knight forces and Scribe research initiatives, where a Knight Commander focuses on conventional military operations and chapter security. The Paladin Commander directs the Brotherhood's special operations, its deep penetration reconnaissance, its high-value technology recovery missions that require elite troops operating with minimal support in the most dangerous locations the Wasteland offers. In Elder Arthur Maxson's Brotherhood, the Paladin Commander also coordinates power armor deployment, deciding which missions warrant the Brotherhood's most advanced suits, managing fusion core inventory, prioritizing armor repairs when workshop resources run short, and maintaining readiness protocols so that at any moment a force of fully armored paladins can deploy from the Prydwen to respond to critical situations like synth infiltration attempts or institute technology sightings. Star Paladins represent a distinction rather than a formal rank, a designation for paladins who have demonstrated extraordinary service over extended careers, whose names appear in Brotherhood records as exemplars of martial excellence and devotion to the Codex. The title carries no additional command authority but significant informal influence. When a star paladin speaks in council meetings or offers tactical suggestions, even elders listen because that rank reflects decades of surviving situations that killed most of their peers, represents institutional knowledge about wasteland threats and technology recovery that becomes increasingly rare as attrition claims the Brotherhood's veterans. Star paladins often serve as mentors to promising knights, as special advisors to elders on complex military situations, or as commanders of the Brotherhood's most critical operations, where failure would represent not just tactical defeat, but potential existential threat to the chapter. The Sentinel rank exists as the Brotherhood's highest military honor, awarded so rarely that most chapters have never produced one, requiring not merely exceptional combat performance, but contributions to the Brotherhood's mission that fundamentally advance its goals. The title of Sentinel comes with the authority to operate outside normal chain of command, to requisition resources and personnel for missions the Sentinel deems critical, to speak directly to the Elder and expect serious consideration of their counsel. In the capital wasteland, Elder Owen Lyons bestowed this rank on the lone wanderer who emerged from Vault 101, recognizing that this outsider's role in Project Purity and the war against the Enclave represented exactly the kind of transformative contribution the Sentinel rank was designed to honor. The decision caused significant controversy among traditionalist Brotherhood members who believed sacred ranks should never be granted to outsiders regardless of their service, but Lyons understood that the Brotherhood's survival increasingly depended on selective adaptation and recognition that wastelanders could serve its mission without being born into its culture. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. The Elder rank represents the culmination of Brotherhood hierarchy, though the path to that position varies dramatically between chapters and historical periods, reflecting fundamental philosophical differences about whether the Brotherhood serves as military dictatorship, technocratic oligarchy, or something attempting to balance both impulses within its isolationist framework. In the original Lost Hills chapter, the Elder position passed initially through the Maxson bloodline, Roger Maxson's legacy creating a quasi-hereditary system where his descendants carried the weight of founding mythology alongside actual administrative responsibility. When John Maxson fell to a super mutant ambush in Twin Bus 155, the succession transferred to his son rather than through any formal selection process. The Brotherhood instinctively clinging to the comfort of dynastic continuity even as it claimed to represent a meritocratic warrior order. This contradiction between stated ideals and actual practice runs through Brotherhood culture like radiation through groundwater, invisible until you test for it, toxic in sufficient concentrations. Other chapters developed different succession mechanisms out of necessity or philosophical preference. The Mojave Brotherhood under Elder Hardin ascended through a Council of Elders vote after Elder McNamara's leadership faced sufficient internal criticism that members demanded change, though whether that vote represented genuine democratic process or carefully orchestrated coup remains debated in whispered conversations among the knights who witnessed the transition. The Capital Wasteland Brotherhood experienced perhaps the most dramatic succession crisis when Elder Owen Lyons' humanitarian reforms created such deep ideological division that nearly half the chapter splintered away to form the Outcasts, believing Lyons had betrayed Roger Maxson's original vision by prioritizing wastelander protection over technology security. When Lyons eventually died and his daughter, Sarah Lyons, assumed the elder position, the arrangement lasted barely long enough for her to warm the seat before her own death in combat left the Capital Wasteland Brotherhood leaderless and fragmenting until Arthur Maxson, young, charismatic, bearing that legendary surname, unified the scattered factions by promising to honor both Lyons compassion, and traditional Brotherhood doctrine in some theoretical synthesis that would preserve the best of both approaches while discarding their contradictions. The Council of Elders functions differently across chapters, sometimes serving as genuine advisory body with real influence over policy, sometimes existing as ceremonial rubber stamp for an elder who brooks no actual shared authority. In theory, the council consists of the chapter's senior paladins and head scribes, voices representing both military and research perspectives, capable of deposing an elder whose decisions threaten the chapter's survival or too drastically violate Codex principles. In practice, the council's power correlates directly to the current elder's personality and leadership style. Strong elders like Arthur Maxson treat the council as information source and sounding board while retaining absolute decision authority, while weaker or more collaborative elders might find themselves essentially implementing council consensus rather than personal vision. Emergency succession protocols theoretically ensure continuity if an elder dies unexpectedly, with the council empowered to select an interim elder and organize formal succession within 30 days. But the chaos following Sarah Lyons' death demonstrated how quickly theory collapses under the weight of competing ambitions and unresolved ideological conflicts within a chapter's leadership structure. The Scribe Orders represent the Brotherhood's intellectual foundation, the institutional knowledge and technical expertise that separates this organization from the countless other military forces that emerged from the apocalypse only to collapse into barbarism or banditry within a generation. The Order of the Sword focuses on weapons research and development, scribes who can disassemble a plasma rifle to its component circuitry and identify manufacturing flaws in pre-war designs that caused catastrophic failures, who spend years studying energy weapon optimization and ballistic improvements with the same intensity that pre-war academics devoted to theoretical physics. These scribes work in workshops that smell of ozone and hot metal, their hands scarred from plasma burns and their eyes strained from examining microscopic components under flickering lamplight, driven by the understanding that Brotherhood military supremacy depends not on numbers. They'll always be outnumbered in the wasteland, but on maintaining technological advantage so significant that a single power-armored paladin can face down a dozen raiders and expect to survive. The Order of the Shield specializes in defensive technologies and power armor maintenance, their expertise extending from the T-45D's relatively simple servo systems to the sophisticated environmental controls and targeting computers integrated into T-60 and X-01 variants. These scribes understand that power armor represents more than protective equipment. It's psychological warfare, mobile fortress, life support system, and cultural identity simultaneously. A shield scribe might spend months perfecting a modification that improves fusion core efficiency by 3%, a seemingly marginal gain that translates to hours of additional operational time per mission. That might mean the difference between a paladin making it back to base or dying alone in the Omaha wasteland when their armor's power finally depletes and leaves them immobilized in hundreds of pounds of unpowered metal. The knowledge these scribes possess about armor weak points and vulnerability profiles makes them simultaneously invaluable and dangerous. The Brotherhood must trust them completely, while remaining aware that a disgruntled shield scribe could share information with enemies that would render power armor's protective advantage nearly meaningless. The Order of the Quill handles historical documentation and records management, maintaining the Brotherhood's institutional memory through careful archiving of mission reports, technology catalogs, combat logs, and the accumulated wisdom of nearly 2 centuries of post-apocalyptic survival. These scribes work in climate-controlled archive rooms when possible, surrounded by pre-war books and holotapes and carefully maintained filing systems that seem almost religious in their organizational precision. A quill scribe understands that history isn't merely academic, it's tactical intelligence, strategic planning, survival guide for navigating a world where the past's mistakes still contaminate the present in literal radioactive form. They maintain the chain that binds, the comprehensive documentation system that tracks every piece of significant technology the Brotherhood has encountered, recovered, destroyed, or lost, creating an institutional knowledge base that prevents the organization from repeatedly rediscovering the same threats or wasting resources investigating technology caches that previous teams already looted decades earlier. The chain that binds documentation protocol exemplifies Brotherhood bureaucratic thoroughness, requiring detailed reports on technology classification, threat assessment, recovery procedures, and final disposition for anything more sophisticated than basic firearms and simple machines. The system operates on a color-coded threat hierarchy: green for technology considered safe for general wasteland use like water purification or agricultural tools, yellow for items requiring monitoring like advanced medical equipment or communication systems, orange for weapons and military technology that must be secured to prevent destabilization, and red for items deemed so dangerous that only destruction or absolute containment satisfies Brotherhood security protocols. This final category includes nuclear weapons, advanced robotics with autonomous military capability, and certain experimental technologies whose exact nature remains classified even within Brotherhood records because knowledge of their existence might inspire attempts to recreate them. The process of threat assessment reveals the Brotherhood's underlying philosophy about technology and humanity. Fundamentally, they believe most wastelanders lack the wisdom and restraint to responsibly wield advanced technology, that giving energy weapons to desperate settlers creates cascading violence as those weapons proliferate through raider hands and merchant black markets, ultimately increasing wasteland suffering more than the original defensive capability justified. A scribe evaluating recovered technology must consider not just its immediate military applications, but its potential for proliferation, its maintenance requirements, whether wastelanders possess the technical knowledge to prevent catastrophic failures, and whether losing Brotherhood control over this technology class would significantly diminish their strategic position relative to other wasteland factions. The fact that these assessments often conclude with confiscation, sometimes at gunpoint from wastelanders who found the technology first and consider it rightfully theirs, generates much of the hostility that surrounds the Brotherhood's relationship with civilian populations. Regional chapter variations in doctrine reflect both environmental pressures and leadership personality differences that accumulated over decades of limited inter-chapter communication. The Lost Hills' original isolationist approach emphasized bunker security, minimal wasteland contact, and absolute technology control, enforced through overwhelming military superiority against any faction that attempted to develop independent technical capabilities. This doctrine made strategic sense in the early post-war decades when wastelanders existed mostly as tribal groups and small settlements barely capable of maintaining pre-war firearms, but became increasingly impractical as larger societies emerged. The new California Republic's growing population and industrial capacity eventually forced Lost Hills to choose between accommodation and military confrontation they couldn't win, leading to an uneasy peace where the Brotherhood retained elite military status but lost their monopoly on advanced technology. Elder Owen Lyons' capital wasteland reforms represented radical departure from this isolationism, redirecting Brotherhood resources toward protecting wastelander settlements from supermutant attacks and investing in humanitarian projects like water purification that offered no direct technology recovery benefit. Lyons believed the Brotherhood's long-term survival required proving they served humanity's interest rather than merely hoarding pre-war knowledge. that demonstrating value to wasteland communities would generate goodwill and recruitment opportunities that could address the Brotherhood's chronic manpower shortage. His critics, who eventually formed the Outcasts, argued that this approach betrayed fundamental Brotherhood principles, that Roger Maxson had explicitly rejected responsibility for protecting the ignorant masses in favor of preserving technology until humanity matured enough to deserve it, and that Lyons was squandering limited resources on charity while allowing critical technology to slip through their fingers because patrols focused on super mutant hunting instead of systematic facility recovery. The Outcast schism itself provides insight into how deeply ideology penetrates Brotherhood identity. These weren't simple deserters or mutineers, they were true believers who saw themselves as preserving authentic Brotherhood doctrine against revisionist corruption, who took the name Outcasts as bitter acknowledgement that they'd been cast out from an organization they still considered righteous in its original form. Fort Independence became their stronghold, where they implemented pure technology recovery protocols without Lyons' humanitarian distractions, confiscating advanced weapons from wastelanders without apology or compensation, prioritizing catalog completion over public relations. The Outcasts' willingness to trade technology for specific items they needed demonstrated their pragmatism. They recognized that absolute isolationism had proven unsustainable, but their refusal to provide any assistance to wastelander settlements, even when tactically convenient, showed how completely they'd rejected Lyons' philosophy. Arthur Maxson's eventual reintegration of the Outcasts under unified East Coast Brotherhood command represented political and ideological synthesis that shouldn't have been possible, except that Maxson possessed unique advantages: the surname that carried mythological weight, youth that allowed him to represent new beginning rather than continuation of old conflicts, and genuine strategic vision that acknowledged valid concerns from both Lyons reformists and Outcast traditionalists. Maxson argued the Brotherhood could and should defend humanity from threats like the Institute's synth infiltration and supermutant armies, but this protection served Brotherhood interests by preventing technological catastrophe and demonstrating value that encouraged recruitment and resource access. Simultaneously, he reinforced strict technology control protocols and ramped up confiscation operations. Satisfying traditionalists who'd feared Lyons' reforms meant abandoning the Brotherhood's core mission. Whether this synthesis represents genuine philosophical breakthrough or simply Maxson's charisma holding together fundamentally incompatible positions remains an open question that the East Coast Brotherhood's future will eventually answer. The Prydwen itself symbolizes Maxson's Brotherhood, a mobile fortress commanding the wasteland from above, technologically sophisticated enough to inspire awe, militarily powerful enough to enforce its will, yet dependent on continuous resource extraction and wastelander cooperation for fuel, food, and intelligence that sustains operations. The airship's command structure mirrors traditional Brotherhood hierarchy but adapted for mobile warfare. The ship operates in 3 8-hour watches with dedicated crews managing propulsion, weapons, and life support, while ground forces rotate through deployment, rest, and training cycles. Proctor positions aboard the Prydwen carry significant authority, each proctor overseeing a specialized department. Proctor Ingram handles engineering and power armor maintenance. Proctor Tegan manages logistics and supply acquisition. Proctor Quinlan directs research and scribe operations, while the Lancer Captain commands the flight crew and manages vertibird operations. These proctors report directly to the Elder but exercise considerable autonomy within their domains, creating a distributed leadership structure necessary for an organization conducting sustained military operations far from established bunker infrastructure. Vertibird operations represent both tactical advantage and logistical nightmare for the East Coast Brotherhood. the ability to rapidly deploy power-armored troops anywhere in the Commonwealth, to extract teams from hostile situations within minutes, to conduct aerial reconnaissance and fire support that no other wasteland faction can match. But each vertibird requires constant maintenance. Each flight consumes fuel that must be scavenged or traded for. Each loss represents not just the airframe's destruction, but often the deaths of highly trained pilots and the knights they were transporting. Lancer crews develop their own culture within the Brotherhood. Pilots and gunners who spend more time in the air than on ground, who navigate by pre-war landmarks and radiation storm patterns, who understand that a single engine failure or rotor malfunction over the glowing sea means death by radiation exposure long before rescue could arrive, even if they survive the crash. If this story has kept you listening this far and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. Specialized combat units within the Brotherhood emerge organically from operational necessity rather than formal organizational charts. Small teams that develop particular expertise through repeated exposure to specific threat types or environmental conditions until they become the default choice when similar situations arise. Lyons Pride represented perhaps the most famous example. A squad of elite soldiers handpicked by Elder Lyons and commanded by his daughter Sarah deployed to the capital wasteland's most dangerous operations, from clearing super mutant strongholds in downtown DC's ruins to engaging Enclave forces at Adams Air Force Base. The Pride's composition changed over years as attrition claimed members and promising knights earned positions through demonstrated capability, but the unit maintained continuity through shared culture and accumulated tactical knowledge that newer members absorbed through immersion. They operated with experimental weapons and priority access to the Brotherhood's best power armor, acknowledging the reality that giving elite troops elite equipment multiplies their effectiveness exponentially, while spreading advanced gear across average soldiers produces diminishing returns that don't justify the logistical complexity. Recon squads function as the Brotherhood's intelligence gathering specialists, typically 3 to 5 members, including at least one scribe for technical assessment, operating in lighter T-45 armor, or sometimes foregoing power armor entirely when stealth takes priority over protection. These teams spend weeks in the field mapping pre-war facilities, identifying technology caches through careful analysis of pre-war records and environmental clues, establishing surveillance on potential threats before the Brotherhood commits major forces to engagement. A recon squad might observe a raider gang for days, documenting their numbers and weapons and patrol patterns before returning to base with recommendation that the gang possesses sufficient advanced weaponry to justify a full assault, but insufficient defensive positions to require Paladin-level troops. The psychological isolation of recon work creates its own challenges. Small teams operating alone in hostile territory, maintaining radio silence to avoid detection, unable to call for support if situations deteriorate beyond their capability to handle, forced to witness wasteland atrocities they lack the numbers to prevent without compromising their mission. Liberty Prime support teams represent the pinnacle of Brotherhood, technical and military coordination, a massive undertaking that required scribes from all 3 orders working alongside combat troops to restore, maintain, and eventually deploy the pre-war robot that became propaganda symbol as much as strategic asset. The scribes who spent years inside Liberty Prime's chassis, replacing damaged circuits and jury-rigging solutions to problems that pre-war manuals never anticipated, developed almost religious attachment to the machine. They'd crawled through its interior spaces, understood its systems with intimate knowledge that came from rebuilding it component by component, and some reported experiencing genuine grief when the Enclave's orbital strike finally destroyed the robot they'd labored so desperately to resurrect. The support operations required for each Liberty Prime deployment included advanced route planning to identify streets and bridges capable of supporting its weight, engineering teams preparing makeshift repairs for inevitable breakdown during operations, ammunition handlers loading its tactical nuclear arsenal, and dedicated vertibird support to provide aerial reconnaissance, since Prime's sensors, despite their sophistication, couldn't match human intelligence analysis for complex tactical situations. Power armor, shock troops tactics evolved through hard experience fighting super mutants in urban environments where the creature's natural strength and damage resistance required Brotherhood forces to develop techniques that maximize their technological advantages. These operations typically involved squad-level coordination where knights advanced in formation, overlapping fields of fire, to ensure no super mutant could close to melee range without passing through concentrated laser and plasma fire. The shock troops learned to use buildings as choke points, collapsing doorways and stairwells behind them to prevent encirclement, calling in vertibird strikes to soften positions before assault, and most critically, maintaining absolute fire discipline, because power armor's protection creates false sense of invulnerability that can lead to reckless behavior. Super mutants strong enough to literally tear power armor apart piece by piece if they get their hands on an isolated knight made the Brotherhood understand that technology advantage meant nothing without tactical discipline and squad cohesion. Recruitment policies reveal perhaps the deepest ideological divisions within Brotherhood culture, whether outsiders can truly become Brotherhood, or whether birthright carries inherent advantage, whether Wastelander recruits should face higher standards than legacy members, or whether maintaining consistent criteria matters more than philosophical purity. The Capital Wasteland Brotherhood, under Lyons, actively recruited Wastelanders, establishing sponsorship programs where existing members could recommend candidates who demonstrated technical aptitude, combat capability, and ideological compatibility with Brotherhood values. These recruits began as aspirants under more intense scrutiny than legacy members, their loyalty perpetually questioned by traditionalists who believed true Brotherhood identity required growing up immersed in the culture, learning the Codex before learning to read, absorbing through childhood the weight of responsibility that comes with wielding pre-war technology. The training regime for Wastelander recruits stretched years rather than months, deliberate hazing disguised as necessary education, designed partly to build capability but equally to test commitment and identify anyone who might eventually betray Brotherhood secrets or defect back to wasteland life. An aspirant might spend 6 months exclusively on power armor maintenance before ever being allowed to wear a suit, learning every servo and circuit and environmental seal through repetitive disassembly and reassembly under scribe supervision that accepted nothing less than perfection. They studied the Codex through memorization and interpretation, debating with senior members about passages whose meaning remained deliberately ambiguous, learning that Brotherhood law required constant judgment rather than simple rule following. Combat training emphasized both individual weapons proficiency and squad tactics, drilling scenarios where equipment failure or ammunition depletion forced improvisation, preparing recruits for the reality that wasteland combat rarely follows training manual expectations. Advancement trials from squire to knight represented formal recognition that an outsider recruit had successfully integrated into Brotherhood culture, though the specific challenges varied by chapter and often by the individual paladin administering the trial. Some tests emphasized technical knowledge, completely disassembling and reassembling a plasma rifle while explaining the function of each component, or diagnosing and repairing deliberately sabotaged power armor within time constraints. Others focused on combat capability, sending the squire on solo patrol through dangerous territory with basic equipment and orders to survive for a specified period while completing reconnaissance objectives. The most revealing trials tested loyalty and judgment through scenarios with no clear correct answer, situations where Brotherhood doctrine conflicted with immediate tactical advantage or personal morality, forcing the squire to demonstrate they understood which principles could bend under pressure and which represented absolute boundaries regardless of consequences. Research and development initiatives within the Brotherhood exist in constant tension between innovation and preservation, between improving existing technology and maintaining the purity of pre-war designs that represent humanity's peak achievement before the bombs fell. Project Purity exemplified this tension, a massive undertaking to restore the Potomac River purification plant and provide clean water to the entire capital wasteland, requiring scribe expertise and Brotherhood resources over decades with no guarantee of success and no direct technology recovery benefit. Elder Lyons' commitment to the project infuriated traditionalists who saw it as wasteful charity, but Lyons understood that demonstrating the Brotherhood could improve wastelander lives built goodwill that opened doors literally and figuratively, that settlers grateful for clean water would report technology sightings and allow Brotherhood patrols through their territory, and consider sending their children to join an organization that offered purpose beyond daily survival. Liberty Prime's restoration consumed Brotherhood technical resources for years, a project that Elder Lyons inherited half-finished and eventually completed through brute force determination despite lacking complete understanding of the robot's systems. The scribes working on Prime often improvised solutions using post-war components to replace pre-war parts whose function they understood but whose manufacturing they couldn't replicate, creating hybrid systems that worked but never quite matched original specifications. The robot's personality subroutines, programmed with jingoistic American propaganda from before the Great War, provided unintentional dark comedy. Prime's declarations about democracy and communism and freedom rang hollow in a wasteland where those concepts had died with the civilization that created them. Yet, the Brotherhood maintained those subroutines partly for morale effect, and partly because removing them might destabilize systems nobody fully understood. T-60 power armor development represented the East Coast Brotherhood's attempt at genuine innovation rather than simple preservation, taking the T-45 chassis that they possessed in quantity and upgrading its protection and systems to near T-51 performance levels without requiring the sophisticated manufacturing capabilities needed to produce actual T-51 suits from scratch. The project succeeded through incremental improvements, better ablative plating, more efficient servo motors, upgraded targeting systems, each modification tested exhaustively before implementation, because power armor failures in combat mean knights die trapped in metal coffins. Proctor Ingram supervised much of this development despite her own catastrophic injuries that required permanent power armor frame integration for mobility. Her technical brilliance recognized even by traditionalists who might otherwise question allowing someone with her level of disability to hold senior position. Her modifications to her own armor frame, adaptations that let her work despite paralyzed legs, inspired broader research into medical applications of power armor technology that the Brotherhood typically ignored in favor of purely military developments. Energy weapon improvements focused on reliability and efficiency rather than increasing destructive capability. Brotherhood scribes understood that laser rifles and plasma weapons already exceeded most tactical requirements, that the real limitation was keeping them operational in wasteland conditions without access to pre-war maintenance facilities and replacement parts. Scribes developed field maintenance protocols for weapon systems that pre-war manuals assumed would receive depot-level service, learned to substitute post-war components for critical parts no longer available, and most importantly, created training programs so average knights could perform basic repairs rather than requiring scribe assistance for every minor malfunction. This democratization of technical knowledge represented pragmatic necessity, but also philosophical shift, acknowledging that Brotherhood's survival required distributing expertise rather than concentrating it in Scribe Orders, even though wider technical knowledge distribution slightly increased the risk of that knowledge eventually leaking to outsiders. Field outpost networks establish Brotherhood presence across territory too large for single bunker coverage, transforming abandoned police stations and fire departments and National Guard armories into fortified positions that project power while providing logistical support for patrols. These outposts typically house squad-sized garrison forces, maybe a dozen knights and support personnel, living in buildings that still smell of pre-war smoke and decay, despite Brotherhood efforts to sanitize and fortify. The troops rotate through outpost duty on schedules designed to prevent both complacency from too much static security work and exhaustion from excessive combat patrol cycles. Though the psychological isolation of outpost assignments creates its own stress, knights surrounded by hostile wasteland knowing that help requires hours to arrive if situations escalate beyond their capacity to handle. Watching civilian wastelanders pass by with expressions mixing fear and resentment toward the power-armored soldiers who represent both protection from raiders and threat of technology confiscation. Police station strongholds concentrate in urban areas where pre-war buildings offer structural integrity and defensive advantages worth the effort of clearing them from whatever ghouls or raiders or other creatures had claimed them as lairs. The Brotherhood typically fortifies these positions extensively, welding steel plates over windows, installing heavy weapons emplacements on roofs, establishing supply caches in basements that might let a garrison survive siege for weeks if necessary. Each stronghold maintains communication equipment for regular check-ins with main headquarters, though the unreliability of wasteland electronics means patrols sometimes discover outposts overrun by enemies or abandoned by garrisons that fled rather than died defending positions they considered indefensible. The psychological weight of outpost duty includes knowing that the Brotherhood might write off isolated positions rather than risk major forces to relieve them. That strategic calculation could mean dying alone in a fortified building surrounded by enemies, while headquarters makes cost-benefit analysis about whether the outpost's value justifies a rescue operation. Observation posts scattered across high-value areas serve intelligence gathering rather than military presence, often established covertly in locations where obvious Brotherhood presence would alert targets to surveillance. A typical observation post might consist of single scribe and one or two knights operating from concealed position with clear sightlines to the facility or territory under watch, maintaining detailed logs of activity, photographing interesting developments when possible, and most critically, staying undetected even when neutralizing threats would be tactically simple. These teams develop elaborate cover stories for local wastelanders who might stumble across their positions, maintaining false identities as scavengers or traders or hermits while conducting actual surveillance. The operational security challenges include disposing of waste without leaving evidence, maintaining equipment without visible power sources, and rotating personnel through positions without establishing patterns that observers might notice. Supply cache systems represent insurance against catastrophic scenarios where main Brotherhood facilities face destruction or siege, pre-positioned resources scattered across territory in locations that only senior leadership and specific designated personnel can access. These caches typically contain weapons, ammunition, power armor components, medical supplies, and survival gear sufficient to keep small Brotherhood units operational for extended periods without base support. The locations remain classified even within the Brotherhood, encoded in documents that require multiple officers to decrypt, ensuring that no single captured or turned member could compromise the entire network. Some caches date back decades, their contents gradually degrading despite preservation efforts, creating situations where desperate knights expecting resupply find rusted weapons and spoiled rations that represent catastrophic intelligence failure as much as simple material breakdown. Communication relay stations maintain the fragile network that lets the Brotherhood coordinate across distances that would otherwise reduce them to isolated bunkers operating independently. These facilities typically occupy high ground or tall pre-war buildings, using salvaged and jury-rigged radio equipment to bounce signals between outposts and headquarters, maintaining the illusion of unified command structure despite vast wasteland distances and hostile territory separating Brotherhood positions. The relay operators, usually scribes with technical expertise in communication systems, live isolated lives in positions that make them priority targets, destroying relay stations' fractures, Brotherhood coordination, forcing them to fall back on slower courier systems, or accepting that far-flung operations will operate autonomously. The psychological strain of relay duty includes monitoring radio channels for distress calls, hearing knights die in real time over static-filled transmissions, unable to do anything but log the incident and inform command, while the voices you've come to recognize through months of routine check-ins go silent one by one. The Brotherhood of Steel persists in the wasteland not through technological advantage alone, though their power armor and energy weapons provide undeniable edge, but through rigid structure that transforms individuals into components of a machine larger than themselves. That structure creates both strength and brittleness, cohesion that lets them accomplish objectives beyond any single member's capability, but inflexibility that prevents adaptation when reality doesn't match doctrinal expectations. In bunkers deep underground and aboard the Prydwen sailing through irradiated skies, knights and scribes and paladins continue executing the mission that Captain Roger Maxson defined in those desperate days after discovering what his government had been willing to do in pursuit of victory. Whether that mission serves humanity's interests or merely the Brotherhood's institutional preservation remains a question without clear answer, complicated by the fact that the Brotherhood itself holds enough destructive capability that their collapse could unleash chaos worse than their authoritarian control. And so they endure, collecting pre-war technology piece by piece, training each new generation in the Codex's principles, maintaining the chain of command that stretches back to that first moment when soldiers became something else in the ruins of what they'd been ordered to protect, perpetuating themselves through sheer determination that in a world this broken, someone must control the weapons that broke it.